Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we're taking a hard look at Israel's economy as we trudge through the ups and downs of the financial swings caused in large part by the coronavirus. Joining us to discuss is Chair of the Jewish Economic Forum, Yonatan Pachi-Fichi, and Senior Economic Specialist from Tel Aviv University, value creation expert, Dr. Alex Coman. Now, to begin, before the pandemic began, Israel had been enjoying one of its strongest economies ever, with continuing growth across many sectors and a high national credit rating. But all that's changed as the Jewish state now makes its way out of its second nationwide lockdown, with roughly 1 million people, or more than 10% of the workforce, now unemployed. So, Alex, Dr. Coman, I want to start with you. How bad is it? What's the situation that we're seeing?
The situation is very bad. I mean, the whole world is doing poorly in the sense that there's unemployment and lockdowns, etc. But the fact that we do not have a leadership, it's like an airplane in a storm, but shooting in the cockpit. So this means that Israel is going to be rated poorly globally in terms of financial management. And this is going to cost us more money because all the countries in the world are trying to get credit so that they can finance the bear market. And Israel will have to pay more because it doesn't have leadership, not economic leadership.
And so, you know, what's maybe a solution to that? What do we do about that?
We change it. Well, we have a strategic economic problem and we have a tactical economic problem. The strategic economic problem is that Netanyahu cannot enforce selective shutdowns because he's so afraid of the religious population. And so he basically shut the whole country down, which does not make any sense and destroys a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses. And the tactical aspect is that the way they provide incentives, the incentives basically cause people to stay at home, because if I get unemployment, why should I go work for the same amount of money? So rather than giving people coupons or paying employers so that people would go to work and the economy would restart, the incentives basically motivate people to sit at home.
All right, so Yonatan, I want to bring you in. You know, do you agree that this is a result of mismanagement as opposed to, you know, act of God, so to speak?
Act of God.
I'm a bit more optimistic, to tell you the truth. I received a phone call today from top manager from one of the European countries, someone very close to one of the European governments, that asked me about the data after the second lockdown. So they are looking at Israel as really a leader in the world, also in the management of the crisis. I don't share this view that anything that Israel is doing is so bad. I do think that we have a lot to teach also to other countries, and I think that the real checkpoint will be the day after. So this pandemic will end one day or the other. The issue is how the economy will kick back at that point. So looking at the problems in the order of magnitude of the next few weeks, it doesn't really impact the economy like for the next few months and years. So what will happen in a year time, 2 year time? That's, I think, it's the real question today.
Well, so I think that's a great question. Yeah.
Well, the problem is that we cannot wait and look at the post-mortem. I mean, it would be a lot of fun to see how things happen within 2 years. I'm talking about the way things are being handled in real time. And we have strategies for that. We are in a situation called VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. We know how to manage such situations. And the way is to come up with measures, a broad range of measures, see which of them succeed, which of them fail, and to choose the successful ones. So you learn as you operate. But the second lockdown was nothing better than the first lockdown. So we don't have this luxury of waiting 2 years. I mean, only God has this luxury of looking back at his creation and saying, wow, it was nice, or no, let's flood it off. So we cannot just hope for the best. We need to look at it in real time. And in real time, I think the public, myself included, looks at the government with a lot of distrust, both in terms of defining the strategy and implementing it.
Well, so, you know, Yonatan, I want to bring you back in again. You know, would you agree to that extent? You know, what about all the things that the finance ministry is doing maybe to keep people afloat? Do you think that that's maybe the right way to manage?
We do have a political problem in this country. It's related to the political system even more than from player A or player B. So I think it's not so fair to address a government that basically pushed Israel to be one of the top economies in the world, and to say that at a certain point collapsed. It's too simplistic, and I think it's also a bit biased. I think that we do have strategic problems in terms of how this country is run, in terms of the political system stability, and the fact that, for example, today, compared to the first lockdown, the government has to basically trade for every single issue that they have to decide. On the first lockdown, we were in the interim government, and the prime minister couldn't basically do anything. So I think that again, the real challenge will be what's going to happen in the next year.
Well, I think to press further on that, because something that actually a lot of our viewers have a problem with and wanted us to discuss today is the bureaucracy in Israel and how that has had an effect on the economy and really in most of the things that we do here in Israel. So, would you?
Well, one of the things, if you're talking about bureaucracy, Israel originally was a socialist country. And socialist countries always pride themselves with bureaucracies, with mortal bureaucracy. And in fact, if you look, there was actually today you could see charts of the gap between the government's decision to help small businesses, unemployed, etc., how much budget was allocated and how much budget was actually reached the final people. And you see incredible numbers. I mean, you see numbers of 15%, 20%, etc. The reason is that most people, and I'm talking about people who have small businesses, hairdressers, food, whatever, restaurants, people don't know how to cut their way through the bureaucracy. People don't know how to get the money that they deserve, or whether they do deserve it at all.
But going back to the heart of my question, even before the coronavirus issue and the bureaucracy aside, would you maybe agree with Yonatan in that Netanyahu did play a large part in bringing Israel to its previous strength?
Well, the question, I would only agree with Yonatan about history. We've had something like 7 Netanyahus. So the first 4 Netanyahus were fantastic economically. They took us from socialism to capitalism, and I salute him for that. The last 3 Netanyahus should be ashamed of themselves because they are basically impotent and they do not provide leadership in such a bad time. We do not have a budget.
How does the bureaucracy and the lack of the budget, and all these issues that are plaguing Israel's economy, how does that affect, the free market or the identity really of the free market capitalist society versus a socialist society?
Well, this is an aspect that the U.S. understands. In the U.S., small businesses, a hairdresser, a falafel stand, they are perceived as the starters of the economy. Because I'm a hairdresser, so I have an assistant and somebody who cleans, and they get a babysitter. So that's how the economy starts working. In Israel, small businesses are perceived to be nothing. We have 30-something ministers. Not a single one of them is responsible for helping the small businesses. So because of the bureaucracy, small businesses, even if they do deserve money, and the laws are really, really incredibly complicated, people don't know how to find themselves, how to find what they deserve in the maze of this killer bureaucracy.
All right, so Yonatan, back to you. Again, talking about some of the initiatives that the finance ministry has maybe allocated in order to help, with grants or forgiveness on lending, et cetera. Is this going to be enough to help the Israeli on the street, the small business owner?
Well, I have the privilege to talk to a lot of new immigrants to Israel. Some of them are small entrepreneurs that open shops and so on. So I have to tell you that some of them were really shocked by the level of support that they received from the government. You may say that their expectation in their origin country were not so high.
But is that also anecdotal, or is that representative of the whole?
Well, I certainly don't have the numbers for the whole, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are struggling these days. But if you compare it apple to other countries, and I'm talking to a lot of European entrepreneurs that are basically in a very bad position, and some of them even in position worse than us. My point is that Israel economy has of all the ingredients to kick back, and the flexibility of the workforce, the flexibility of the entrepreneurs, the mentality of the Israeli entrepreneurs, I think it would be a strategic asset for this country once the situation will settle down a bit.
I agree about entrepreneurs, but the problem is this. Israel has a very big public sector. So employees in the public sector basically were not hurt at all because their salaries keep on going in and everything is fine. Then you have entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs were devastated. And actually the pictures that we just saw here, where you saw those closed restaurants, you just walk the streets and you see all those signs for rent and all these businesses that are shut down. So it's not anecdotal. And we're talking about statistics. We're talking about 1 million unemployed. So
about
yes, Israel will, excuse me?
That's about 1 in 9 Israelis.
Yeah, it's incredible. And we had one of the lowest unemployment numbers in the world. We had 3% unemployment. It was a joke. So so my point is, yes, Israel will bounce back. The future is rosy, but the management in real time destroys those people with the initiative. So the people with the initiative are being hurt. The people who just go to their jobs and sit and get a monthly salary, they are doing well. So that's something that's very bad for the entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit of the country.
Well, so is the entrepreneurial spirit of the country really what's been damaged, or is it really just going to have to evolve with the new marketplace as it appears after COVID? So
for that reason, we need to get rid of the bureaucracy. You need to make it very easy for people to put a certain amount of money and open a business without having to go through this purgatorium of bureaucracy, getting authorization that they're not using dangerous materials or whatever. And people who need to get help should get the help. I mean, you saw on one extreme, we had this, every one of us received 750 shekels. I did not, but everybody was given, because that's where you have zero bureaucracy. On the other hand, you have infinite bureaucracy. We should find the sweet spot in the middle.
Jonathan?
I totally agree. There is a lot of room for improvement. I just think that let's imagine for a second how it would look like the situation in Israel if all the reforms that we did have in the last decades were not in place. So we are talking about the bureaucracy and the public sector. Let me remind you that the public sector was shrinked by the present prime minister, and he received a lot of critics for that. So I do think that we are used here in Israel to judge things from a week to the other. Sometimes things are not so fast like we believe or we would like to be. I agree. It's not 100%, but it's much better than many other places in the world that I've seen.
All right. Well, yeah.
I would like to say something. My area is decision making, group decision making. And group decision, and so very often when you look at the final decision, you want to see the process that led to the decision, because in this situation of the COVID-19, very often you make mistakes because you don't understand, you don't know how things work.
The pressure of time is off.
And the pressure of time and the uncertainty. Sure. So when I look at the decision-making process, it's terrible in the sense that many people are not included in the decision-making process. Just if you think about the head of the Israel
But
Bank.
what about the whole idea of too many cooks in the kitchen? That you have too many opinions, too many people, but then nothing gets done.
Absolutely, you cannot have a carnival in the kitchen. But between 0 and infinity, there is a sweet spot.
We have a coronavirus cabinet, do we not, with a finance?
Well, not really. For instance, the head of Israel's central bank is not part of this process. So you see many people who are significant thinkers in this area are not included in the process. I agree. It should not be a pogrom where you have everybody run in.
Well, I want to talk for a second about the rosy future, as you called it,
okay.
that is likely to come. Because as we exit the coronavirus, as we exit lockdowns, as we move beyond this pandemic, however long it'll take to do that, something interesting is happening. Israel's exchange rate, as we're leaving the lockdown right now, is actually really strong.
That's bad. Okay, you realize that strong is bad.
So why is that bad?
Because if you think about Israeli companies exporting to the world, if the Israeli currency is strong, then the products that we export become very expensive. One of the reasons, one of the things that hurt the Japanese automobile industry was the fact that the yen gained in value, and so Japanese cars became more expensive, and Korean cars took over. So you want your currency. I mean, if you're a tourist, you like to have a strong currency because your money can buy a lot of when you're a tourist. But if you're an industrialist, you want your currency to be weak. This way, your products are competitive versus other products. So that's why the Israel Central Bank is buying dollars to weaken the shekel.
So, Yonatan, maybe weigh in on here. What can we do to mitigate the consequences long term?
One of the reasons for this shekel situation is the fact that huge amounts of foreign currencies flow into the market. Just in the month of September, more than $1 billion were invested in the Israeli high-tech sector. So we are having stellar numbers in the tech industry, and all those dollars are basically changed into shekels, and they're pushing the shekel up. So yes, it's an issue.
Well,
we will have also the issue of royalties from the gas, and I sincerely hope that this will be managed in a way that will help the country to kick back. And the third issue that I think it's extremely important is the fact that we are opening new markets. So we have seen what is going on with the UAE and Bahrain, and probably more countries coming in the next few months. So I do think we have all the elements to think of a much better future.
Well, so okay, you mentioned the high-tech market doing fine, and of course the new welcomed peace with the United Arab Emirates. But what does that do with respect to the wealth gap? What does that do to all the sectors that are not high-tech related in Israel?
Well, in the last decades, the boom of the economy was related to the high tech. More money coming into the market, and all the services that are around basically benefited from the boom of the high tech economy. So there is a gap. And what I was mentioning before is that the flexibility of the Israeli market, it will allow us to be in a much better shape. So compared to what's going on in Europe, you have huge workforce that their the business sector was just erased. Israelis are used to change work, to change place of work, to change even activity. I spoke with a few friends in the last few days, and they completely changed their careers, and they're okay with it. They understand that their work, their job is not there anymore. So they are thinking, okay, what's next? And the flexibility, the mentality of the Israelis, it will allow that. I think in this respect, we are in a much better shape than many other countries where the culture doesn't allow people to think out of the box.
Yes, I agree that Israel has this agility. Also, Israel was lucky of not having heavy industries. If you think about Europe, and you think about auto manufacturers such as Fiat or Peugeot, etc., they are basically being devastated by the Far East, by Japanese and Korean automobile manufacturers. So they are really hurt big time. In Israel, I'm concerned about the gap. Yes, if you're in the high-tech industry, you make a lot of money, your life is sweet, you're pampered at lunch and everything, you're like a baby. However, if you're not in the high-tech sector, you're in deep trouble. And we also have a very big religious sector. And I really hope, the hope for the religious sector is actually women. Because I've met many women from the religious sector working in the high-tech industry, which I find very, very exciting. Because it basically means that the women in the high-tech, in the religious community will actually bring in a higher level of income. And they will see the big world. And I believe that they will find their world in their place in the family, because basically, if you bring in the bread.
But I feel a but coming on, though.
No.
It's just all good things there.
I'm very optimistic about this being the way to open this Gordian knot and solve the problem of a big religious population that is unemployed.
Still, what about again? Yeah, Jonathan.
No, by the way, the same goes with a certain segment of the Arab population. I think that the new development with the Gulf countries brings also a lot of optimism for all those business people in the Arab sectors and the young people doing high tech and other in knowledge-based jobs to be a bridge to all those Arab countries that suddenly are doing business with us. So I totally agree with going on with the ultra-Orthodox, with the Haredi community, but I think we should also look at the Arab population of the country.
This is a big thing. I mean, if you think about the fact that Israel is inside this big Arab world, there are many opportunities because many of the tools that work in the West, Facebook, etc., do not work in the Arab world. And we have a big population that speaks Arabic and knows the Arab world. So, for instance, I know of Israeli entrepreneurs who came up with startups for crowdfunding in Lebanon. Or, for instance, if you want to deliver a pizza in an Arab capital.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but does that mean that the peace with the UAE really may be our saving grace with this economic, crisis?
Well, it's funny because there's a guy that I go to buy peanuts from, and he told me, we'll have all these UAE guys coming and buying peanuts.
Visa waivers with an Arab country for the first time?
I don't see I don't see all the airplanes bringing people from the United Arab Emirates to buy peanuts in Tel Aviv. I can see a few tourists there, but remember, it's a very small population. But I do believe that we can take advantage of this niche of understanding the Arab world and understanding technology and coming up with things that are tailored to the specific needs of this area.
Yonatan, final comment?
I totally agree. I think that we should look at this new diplomatic development, 1, 2, about the booming of the technology, and 3, about the energy and natural gas. And we do need to remember also the fact that we are entering agreements with Europe with this new gas line. And I think that there is a lot of room to be optimistic.
All right. Well, I think that leaving on an air of optimism, I think that might be the way to go. So, on that optimistic note, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you, Yonatan Pacifici and Dr. Alex Coman, for joining us. And tune in next time on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. Also, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know in the comment sections online. In fact, this topic today comes from a comment section. And finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.